On my wedding day, my fiancé left me at the altar to help his manipulative mother. So I put an end to it. I'm 28 years old, and I should have seen the red flags 2 years ago when I first met his mother. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? Or maybe I was just naive enough to believe that things would change once we got married. My fiancé is 32, successful enough, handsome in that generic way that makes mothers approve. But there's one problem. He's never cut the umbilical cord. Not metaphorically. Literally, his 58-year-old mother controls every aspect of his life, and by extension, mine. Take yesterday, for instance. We were driving to look at wedding venues, and I naturally headed for the passenger seat. Oh no. "Dear," his mother chirped from behind us, "the front seat is for family." She slid past me with that saccharine smile I've learned to despise. My fiancé didn't even blink. He just shrugged apologetically as I climbed into the back like a child. This is my life now. She chooses his clothes. Navy suits you better than black, sweetheart. She rearranges our apartment when she visits. This couch would look so much better against that wall. She even has opinions about our bedroom, commenting on the thread count of our sheets and suggesting we need more romantic lighting, with a wink that makes my skin crawl. The worst part? He agrees with everything. Every single thing. She just cares about us. He tells me when I try to bring it up. She wants what's best. But what's best for whom? Certainly not for me, sitting in restaurant booths while she feeds him bites of dessert like he's 5 years old. Not for me, listening to her detailed opinions about when we should start having children and how many we should have. Not for me, watching my grown man fiancé call his mother 3 times a day to report his whereabouts like a teenager with a curfew. I've tried talking to him about boundaries. God knows I've tried. But every conversation ends the same way, with him defending her and me feeling like the unreasonable one. "She's just excited about the wedding," he'll say. Or, "She's getting older. We need to be patient." Patient. I've been patient for 2 years, watching this woman orchestrate our entire relationship from the sidelines. She picked our engagement ring. Diamonds are so classic, don't you think? She chose our wedding venue. The country club has such lovely gardens. She even insisted on approving our guest list, striking out friends she deemed inappropriate influences. And tomorrow is our wedding day. Tomorrow I'm supposed to walk down that aisle and promise to love, honor, and apparently share my husband with his mother for the rest of my life. But as I sit here tonight, looking at my wedding dress hanging in the closet, something inside me is screaming that this isn't right. This isn't how love is supposed to feel. I shouldn't have to compete with my future mother-in-law for my own husband's attention. The rehearsal dinner was the final straw. She stood up and gave a speech about how no woman will ever love him like his mother does, and how she hopes I'll take good care of her baby boy. The entire room fell silent. Even my parents looked uncomfortable. I'm not marrying a man. I'm marrying a boy who never grew up, and his mother is making sure he never will. But it's too late now, isn't it? The church is booked, the flowers are arranged. 200 people are expecting a wedding tomorrow. My dress cost more than my car. The deposits are non-refundable. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe all mothers-in-law are like this. Maybe I just need to adjust my expectations and learn to share. But deep down, in a place I've been trying to ignore, I know the truth. I know that tomorrow I'll be signing up for a lifetime of coming second in my own marriage. And I don't know if I can do it. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with pre-ceremony nerves. I'd barely slept, replaying that rehearsal dinner speech over and over in my head. But the show must go on, right? Hair, makeup, photographs. My bridesmaids fluttered around me, gushing about how beautiful everything looked. The church was decorated exactly as his mother had envisioned. White roses and baby's breath, elegant but somehow cold. Nothing I would have chosen. I stood at the back of the church in my grandmother's pearls and a dress that cost more than my first car. 200 guests filled every pew. My father squeezed my arm and whispered, "You look radiant, sweetheart. Are you ready?" Was I? My heart was hammering against my ribs, but not with excitement, with dread. We began the processional. My bridesmaids glided down the aisle in their pale pink dresses. Another choice made by his mother, naturally. Then it was my turn. Every face turned toward me, smiling, expectant. There he was, waiting at the altar in his navy suit, the one she'd insisted he wear. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his tie. Behind him stood his best man, his cousin who'd flown in from Seattle. And there, in the front pew, sat his mother in an elaborate cream-colored dress that was definitely too close to white for wedding etiquette. She was beaming like she was the bride, The ceremony began beautifully. The minister spoke about love, commitment, partnership, all the things I'd hoped to find in marriage. We reached the exchange of vows, the moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading. The minister asked if anyone had objections to this union. The church fell silent, as churches do during that ceremonial pause. And then it happened. A loud gasp echoed through the sanctuary, followed by the sound of someone collapsing. His mother had suddenly clutched her chest and slumped forward in her pew, her face contorted in apparent agony. "My heart!" she wailed. "Something's wrong with my heart!" The congregation erupted in concerned murmurs. Someone shouted to call an ambulance. My future father-in-law looked genuinely panicked. But I knew. God help me. I knew exactly what this was. My fiancé didn't hesitate. He stepped away from me, from the altar, from our vows, and rushed to his mother's side. Mom, what's wrong? Someone call 911. I stood there in my wedding dress, holding my bouquet, watching the man I was supposed to marry choose his mother over me at the most important moment of our lives. The minister looked confused. Guests were standing up to get a better look, and my parents were staring at me with a mixture of concern and mortification. This was it. The moment of truth that I'd been unconsciously preparing for during 2 years of being pushed aside, dismissed, and relegated to second place. I walked down from the altar, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo in the chaos. I approached my fiancé, who was kneeling beside his mother, holding her hand. "Choose," I said quietly, but my voice carried in the acoustics of the church. He looked up at me, confused. "What? Choose right now?" I repeated, louder this time. "Be my husband, or continue being her eternal little boy. But you can't be both." His mother's episode seemed to intensify at my words. She gripped his hand tighter, breathing heavily. "I need you," she gasped. "Don't leave me." I watched his face. I saw the exact moment he made his choice. He stayed kneeling beside her. "I can't leave her like this," he said. "You have to understand." I understood perfectly. I'd understood for 2 years, but I'd chosen to ignore it. I'd chosen to hope things would change, that marriage would somehow magically transform our dynamic. I set my bouquet down on the altar and addressed our guests, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. "I'm sorry everyone came so far for this, but there won't be a wedding today. Apparently the groom is already married." Then I walked back down that aisle, alone, my train trailing behind me like a ghost. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of shocked whispers, but I didn't turn around. By evening, his mother had made a complete recovery. I heard from my cousin that she was actually seen dancing at the reception they held anyway, without the bride, of course. 1 week later, I was sitting in my apartment in the same pajamas I'd worn for 3 days straight, surrounded by wedding gifts I couldn't bear to return, and sympathy flowers that were starting to wilt. The humiliation was suffocating. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, expecting another well-meaning friend asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. I was a 28-year-old woman who'd been abandoned at the altar because a grown man couldn't cut his mother's apron strings. The story was probably making rounds at every dinner party in town. When the doorbell rang that Tuesday afternoon, I almost didn't answer. But the persistent knocking suggested whoever it was wasn't going away. I opened the door to find him, my ex-fiancé's uncle, the one family member I'd actually respected. At 47, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from real success, not the inherited kind. He was the one who'd built the family business from the ground up, turning a small construction company into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. "I brought lunch," he said simply, holding up bags from the Italian place downtown. "Figured you might not be eating much." I probably looked terrible. Unwashed hair, tear-stained cheeks, wearing sweatpants that had seen better days. But he didn't comment. He just walked past me into the kitchen and started unpacking containers of pasta and salad, like he'd done it 100 times before. "You don't have to pretend this is a social call," I said, slumping into a chair. "If you're here to do damage control for your family, I'm here because what happened was wrong," he interrupted, not looking up from the containers. "And because I've watched that woman manipulate my nephew his entire life, and I'm tired of pretending it's normal." I stared at him. In 2 years of family gatherings, no one had ever acknowledged what everyone could clearly see. He sat across from me, pushing a container of chicken Alfredo in my direction. "Eat. Then we'll talk about what you need." "I don't need anything from your family," I said, but my stomach betrayed me by growling audibly. "This isn't about family," he replied. "This is about making sure you land on your feet." As I picked at the pasta, the first real food I'd had in days, He laid out practical solutions with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone accustomed to fixing problems. A lawyer friend who could handle returning the gifts and dealing with vendor contracts. A real estate contact who could help me find a new apartment if I wanted to start fresh somewhere else. A recommendation for a good therapist. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his water glass in slow circles on the table. "Because I've been married for 22 years to a woman I don't love, and I know what it's like to wake up every day in the wrong life," he said finally. "You're 28. You have time to build something real." There was something in his voice, a loneliness that I recognized because I'd been feeling it too, even while engaged. The loneliness of being with someone who didn't really see you. "I keep thinking I should have known better," I admitted. "All the signs were there. Love makes us stupid sometimes," he said with a slight smile. "But stupidity isn't permanent. What matters is what you do next." Over the next hour, we talked. Really talked. He listened without trying to fix me or tell me everything happens for a reason. He didn't minimize what had happened or suggest I'd dodged a bullet. He just acknowledged that it hurt, and that the hurt was valid. When he left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Not happiness, not yet. But relief. Like someone had finally told me it was okay to be angry about being treated badly. I looked around my apartment. Our apartment. Technically, since my ex's name was still on the lease. Tomorrow I'd call the lawyer. Tomorrow I'd start the process of untangling my life from his. But tonight, for the first time in a week, I was going to shower and put on clean clothes. It seemed like a small thing, but it felt like the first step back to myself. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. The lawyer had been worth every penny. Efficient, discreet, and completely professional about handling the mess of canceled vendors and returned gifts. I'd found a cozy one-bedroom apartment across town, away from all the places that held memories of him. The therapy sessions were helping too. Dr. Martinez, I'd started calling her Maria after she insisted, helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just a failed relationship, but a pattern of emotional manipulation that had slowly eroded my sense of self-worth. "You're rebuilding your identity," she'd told me during our last session. "That takes time, but you're making remarkable progress." The new job at the marketing firm downtown was exactly what I needed. Challenging enough to keep my mind busy, with colleagues who knew nothing about my personal drama. I was good at it too, which felt like a revelation after months of being made to feel like my opinions didn't matter. He'd been checking in regularly, my ex's uncle. Never intrusively, just a text every few weeks asking how I was settling in, if I needed anything. Sometimes he'd recommend a book he thought I'd like, or mention a new restaurant worth trying. It was the kind of friendship I'd never experienced with a man, completely without agenda, based on genuine respect and mutual understanding. We'd started meeting for coffee occasionally, usually on Saturday afternoons at a quiet place near the river. He'd tell me about the challenges of running his business, the satisfaction of building something from nothing. I'd share stories from my new job, my small victories in rediscovering who I was outside of that suffocating relationship. "You seem different," he observed during one of our conversations, stirring sugar into his espresso. "Stronger. I feel different," I admitted. "Like I'm finally allowed to take up space in my own life." He smiled at that, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. That's exactly how it should be. What struck me most about our friendship was how he listened. Really listened. When I talked about my ideas for improving processes at work, he didn't dismiss them or suggest modifications. He asked thoughtful questions, challenged my assumptions in ways that made me think harder, better. It was intoxicating, being treated like an intellectual equal by someone I respected. "Your ex-nephew is an idiot," I'd told him once, making him laugh, a genuine, surprised sound. "Yes, well, intelligence isn't hereditary," he'd replied. "Neither is wisdom, unfortunately." He never talked much about his own marriage, but I could read between the lines. 22 years of going through the motions, of sleeping in the same bed as someone who'd never really known him. His wife was perfectly nice, perfectly appropriate. I'd met her at family gatherings, but there was no spark there, no connection deeper than shared social circles and financial comfort. I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than I probably should have. He had this way of making me feel seen, valued, intellectually stimulated. After years of having my thoughts dismissed or ignored, it was like discovering I had a voice that someone actually wanted to hear. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," he told me one afternoon, "about expanding the company's environmental initiatives. I've scheduled a meeting with some consultants next month. The fact that he'd not only remembered my suggestion but acted on it made something warm unfurl in my chest. This was what partnership looked like. Two people building something together, respecting each other's contributions. I was learning what it meant to be valued for my mind, not just tolerated as an accessory to someone else's life. And for the first time in years, I was excited about my future. 1 year after the wedding disaster, I was sitting across from him at our usual coffee shop when I realized I was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble that ruins your life, the kind that changes it completely. He was telling me about a business trip to Seattle, describing the city's energy and innovation, when he paused mid-sentence and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something had shifted in the air between us, a recognition that we both felt but neither wanted to acknowledge. "I should probably head home," he said quietly, checking his watch even though we'd only been there for 30 minutes. But he didn't move to leave. Neither did I. "This is complicated," I whispered, voicing what we'd both been dancing around for months. He nodded, running his hand through his graying hair, a gesture I'd come to find incredibly attractive, though I'd tried not to notice. Very complicated. The attraction had been building slowly, so gradually that I'd managed to pretend it wasn't happening. But sitting there, watching him struggle with the same feelings I'd been fighting, I couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't just friendship. This was something much deeper and infinitely more dangerous. Over the following weeks, our coffee meetings became more infrequent. When we did see each other, there was a tension that made casual conversation nearly impossible. We were both trying to step back from whatever was growing between us, but the connection we'd built was too strong to simply ignore. He started marriage counseling with his wife. He told me this during what would be our last coffee meeting for several months. "I owe it to both of us to try," he said, but his eyes looked hollow. 22 years is a long time to throw away. I respected his decision even as it broke my heart in ways I wasn't prepared for. He was doing the honorable thing, trying to save his marriage before acknowledging feelings for another woman. It was exactly what I would have expected from a man of his integrity. "I think we need some space," he said, and I agreed, even though the thought of losing his friendship felt like losing a limb. The next few months were some of the hardest I'd experienced since the altar incident. I threw myself into work, took up pottery classes, started training for a half marathon, anything to keep my mind occupied. But nothing could fill the space he'd left in my life. I dated a little. A colleague set me up with her brother, a perfectly nice accountant who took me to dinner and made appropriate conversation. But every comparison I made was unfair to him. He wasn't funny in the same way, didn't challenge my ideas with the same intellectual curiosity, didn't make me feel like the most interesting person in the room. My therapist helped me work through the guilt I felt about falling for a married man. "Feelings aren't choices," Maria reminded me. "What matters is how we act on them." I hadn't acted, neither had he, but that didn't make the feelings any less real or any less painful. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in November, he called me. His voice was different, tired, but also somehow lighter. "Can we meet?" he asked. "There's something I need to tell you." We met at a different coffee shop this time, one downtown that we'd never been to together. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the months we'd been apart. "I'm getting divorced," he said without preamble. "We've been in counseling for months, trying to find something worth saving, and we finally admitted there's nothing there. There never really was." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved," he admitted. "Sad for the time we wasted, but mostly relieved. We're going to handle it amicably. She's actually happier too, now that we've stopped pretending." We talked for hours that day, carefully navigating around the elephant in the room, us. The divorce would take time, he explained. They were both committed to doing it right, dividing assets fairly, maintaining dignity throughout the process. "I don't want to rush into anything," he said as we prepared to leave. "But I also can't pretend anymore that you're just a friend." Neither could I. 18 months after my altar abandonment, he showed up at my apartment on a Sunday evening with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine I'd mentioned liking months earlier. The divorce papers had been filed that week. "I know we said we'd wait," he began, setting the food on my kitchen counter. "But I need to be honest with you. I'm in love with you, completely, hopelessly in love with you." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I'd been afraid to cross. I'd been in love with him too, probably since those first months of rebuilding my life. But hearing him say it first made everything real in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I love you too," I whispered, and watched his face transform with relief. The kiss that followed was nothing like the polite pecks I'd shared with my ex-fiancé. This was hungry, desperate, the culmination of months of careful distance and suppressed feelings. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, my hands still fisted in his shirt. "Your family is going to lose their minds, especially your sister-in-law." He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Let them. I've spent my entire adult life doing what was expected, being the responsible one who fixes everyone else's problems. For once, I'm going to choose what makes me happy." We agreed to keep the relationship private until his divorce was finalized. It felt like the mature, respectful thing to do, even though it meant stolen evenings at my apartment and careful scheduling to avoid being seen together in public. Those secret months were some of the happiest of my life, away from the judgment of others. We could just be ourselves. Two people who'd found something rare and precious and were determined to protect it. He'd arrive at my place after work with groceries and cook dinner while I told him about my day. We'd sit on my couch reading different books, our legs tangled together, occasionally sharing interesting passages. He introduced me to jazz music and single malt whiskey. I got him hooked on true crime podcasts and convinced him to try yoga. "I never knew relationship could be this easy," he told me one evening as we walked along the river path near my apartment. It was nearly dark, safe from recognition. "Easy?" I laughed. "You call secret dating easy?" "I call being with someone who actually likes me easy," he said, squeezing my hand. "Someone who laughs at my jokes and argues with my opinions and makes me want to be better than I am." The contrast with my previous relationship was stark and painful. With my ex-fiancé, I'd constantly felt like I was performing, trying to be the version of myself that would earn approval from him and his mother. With him, I could be completely authentic, ambitious, opinionated, sometimes cranky after long days at work. He loved all of it. We talked about everything: books, politics, childhood memories, dreams for the future. He told me about building his company from nothing, the satisfaction of creating something lasting. I shared my ideas about starting my own marketing consultancy someday, and instead of dismissing the plan, he helped me refine it. "You have excellent instincts," he said after reviewing my business plan. "With the right backing and connections, you could build something significant." 3 months into our secret relationship, his divorce became final. The settlement was generous but fair. His ex-wife got the house and half of his non-business assets. She seemed genuinely relieved to be free, already making plans to travel and explore interests she'd neglected during their marriage. "Now what?" I asked the night the papers were signed. "Now we stop hiding," he said, pulling me close. "I want to take you to dinner at the best restaurant in the city. I want to hold your hand in public. I want everyone to know that I'm with the smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever met." I should have been excited, and I was. But I also knew that going public would mean facing his family, and particularly my ex-fiancé and his mother. The thought made my stomach clench with anxiety. "They're going to say terrible things about me," I said. "About us." "Let them talk," he replied. "We know the truth. That's all that matters." 2 years after my non-wedding, his mother discovered our relationship in the most dramatic way possible. We'd been careful, so careful, but apparently not careful enough. I was at his place, the downtown condo he'd bought after the divorce, when she used her emergency key to let herself in. She'd been worried because he hadn't returned her calls for 2 days, she claimed. Never mind that he was a 47-year-old man who didn't owe anyone a daily check-in. The look on her face when she saw me coming out of his bedroom in one of his shirts was worth photographing. Pure, unadulterated rage mixed with the kind of shock usually reserved for natural disasters. "You," she hissed, pointing at me like I was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "You did this. You destroyed his marriage." "My marriage was over long before I met her," he said calmly, emerging from the kitchen with coffee. He didn't seem surprised to see his sister-in-law in his living room. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd call before coming over." But she wasn't listening to him. She was staring at me with the intensity of someone who'd finally found the target for years of accumulated frustration. "How long?" she demanded. "That's none of your business," I replied, accepting the coffee mug from him. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt remarkably calm for someone facing down my worst nightmare. "It is my business when you're destroying this family," she shrieked. "First, you humiliate my son at his own wedding, and now you steal his uncle. What kind of person are you?" "The kind who doesn't abandon someone at the altar," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Even she seemed to realize she'd overplayed her hand by bringing up the wedding. "I want you out of this family," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Stay away from him. Stay away from all of us." I don't think that's your decision to make, he said, his arm sliding around my waist. This is my life, not yours to control. By the next day, the whole family knew. His phone didn't stop ringing, relatives calling to express their shock, disappointment, concern for his state of mind. My ex-fiancé called him personally, screaming about betrayal and family loyalty until he hung up. The accusations were predictable and cruel. I was a gold digger who'd targeted him from the beginning. A manipulative woman who'd destroyed one relationship and was now destroying another. A shameless opportunist who'd seduced a grieving divorcee. They're saying I planned this, I told him after a particularly vicious voicemail from his nephew's wife, that I've been after your money since the beginning. Do you care what they think? He asked. I considered the question seriously. A year ago, the answer would have been yes. The old me would have been devastated by their disapproval, would have tried to explain and defend and justify. But that woman had died at the altar 2 years ago. No, I realized with surprise. I really don't. The social fallout was swift and brutal. We lost friends who didn't want to pick sides, or who'd decided we were the villains in this story. Invitations dried up. People who'd been warm and friendly before now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. But something interesting happened in the midst of the scandal. Other people I hadn't expected, reached out with support. My boss at the marketing firm took me to lunch and shared her own story of leaving an unhappy marriage for true love. My therapist reminded me that other people's opinions weren't facts. Even some of his business associates privately congratulated him on finding happiness. The people who matter understand, he told me one evening as we read the latest gossip circulating through their social circles. The rest never mattered anyway. 3 weeks after the discovery, we went public officially, attending a charity gala together. He introduced me as his partner to everyone we met, his hand never leaving the small of my back, his pride in our relationship evident to anyone paying attention. The whispers followed us around the room, but we danced anyway. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be with someone who was proud to claim me, who didn't care what anyone else thought as long as we were together. No regrets? He asked as we swayed to the orchestra's rendition of an old jazz standard. Not a single one, I replied, and meant it completely. 2 years and 3 months after the altar incident, we made the decision that would change everything. We were going to get married. The proposal wasn't traditional. We'd been discussing it for weeks like the partnership it was. No dramatic gestures or surprise rings. Just 2 adults deciding to legally commit to the life they'd been building together. I want to do this right, he told me as we sat in his lawyer's office, discussing prenuptial agreements and estate planning. I want you protected, no matter what happens. The prenup he proposed was unlike anything I'd ever heard of. Instead of protecting his assets from me, it guaranteed me a significant portion of everything he'd built. 60% of the business, ownership of properties, investment portfolios, a true partnership in every sense. This is insane, I said, staring at the documents. What if we don't work out? Then you'll still be set for life, he replied simply. You helped me remember what happiness feels like. That's worth more than money. But the real shock came when he announced his intentions to the family. Not about the marriage. They'd suspected that was coming. About the changes he was planning to make. For years, he'd been the family ATM, subsidizing his nephew's lifestyle, paying for his sister-in-law's shopping sprees, covering car payments and vacations and emergencies both real and imagined. The family had grown accustomed to his generosity, had come to see it as their right rather than his choice. That stops now, he announced during a family dinner we'd been foolish enough to attend. My priority is my wife and the family we plan to build together. The explosion was immediate and fierce. How could he abandon family for some woman who'd already proven she was destructive? How could he be so selfish after everything they'd done for him? What exactly have you done for me? He asked calmly, cutting through the hysteria. Because from where I sit, I've been the one doing all the giving. My ex-fiancé was the most vocal in his outrage. She's turned you against us, he accused. This isn't who you are. You're right, he agreed. This isn't who I was. I was an enabler who confused financial support with love. I'm not doing that anymore. The wedding itself was elegant and intimate. 50 guests who genuinely celebrated our happiness rather than coming to gawk at the scandal. My parents, who'd come to adore him, walked me down the aisle together. His few remaining family members who'd chosen our side over the dramatics sat with genuine smiles. His ex-wife even sent a beautiful congratulations card with a handwritten note. I hope you both find the happiness we couldn't give each other. The ceremony was everything my first almost wedding wasn't. Authentic, meaningful, centered on our actual relationship rather than someone else's vision. When the minister asked if anyone objected, we both laughed, remembering the dramatic scene from 2 years earlier. No one collapsed, no one interrupted. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising partnership, respect, and the kind of love that makes both people stronger. The reception was held at a boutique hotel downtown, decorated with flowers I'd actually chosen. As we danced to our song, the same jazz standard we'd danced to at that first public appearance, I marveled at how different everything felt. "Mrs. Patterson," he whispered in my ear, using my new name for the first time. "I like the sound of that," I replied, though it would take time to get used to. But even in our happiness, we knew the real challenges were just beginning. The family had made it clear they viewed our marriage as a betrayal, and the financial changes he'd announced would hit them hard. For years, they'd lived beyond their means, subsidized by his generosity. My new mother-in-law had been particularly venomous, telling anyone who would listen that I'd manipulated a vulnerable man during his divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. She, who'd manipulated her own son his entire life, accusing me of manipulation for encouraging independence. "They'll come around," my new husband said optimistically as we packed for our honeymoon in Italy. "No, they won't," I replied, and I was okay with that. But it doesn't matter. We don't need their approval to be happy. The honeymoon was a revelation. 2 weeks of exploring Tuscany, eating incredible food, making love without worrying about who might see us together. For the first time in years, we both completely relaxed. On our last night in Florence, as we sat on the terrace of our hotel overlooking the Arno River, he pulled out his phone and showed me a series of increasingly desperate texts from various family members. "Your nephew's been calling about his car payment," I noted, scrolling through the messages. "He has a job," my husband replied, pouring more wine. "He can make his own car payments. And your sister-in-law wants you to cover her credit card bill. She has a husband for that." It was strange watching him establish boundaries he should have set decades ago. But better late than never, I supposed. The real test would come when we returned home, and the family realized he wasn't bluffing about cutting off the financial support. They'd assumed his marriage was just a phase, that eventually he'd come to his senses and return to being their personal bank. They were about to learn otherwise. As we flew back to the States, I squeezed his hand and prepared for the war that was coming. Because it was coming, I could feel it. The family that had lived off his generosity wasn't going to accept their new reality quietly. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready for whatever they could throw at us. I wasn't the broken woman who'd been abandoned at an altar anymore. I was a wife, a partner, and soon to be a business owner with real power. Let them come. 3 years after my altar humiliation, I walked into the headquarters of Patterson Construction as the majority owner of a multi-million-dollar company. The irony was delicious. The legal paperwork had been finalized while we were on our honeymoon. As my husband's wife, I now controlled 60% of the business that had made his entire family wealthy. The same family that had spent months calling me a gold digger was about to discover what real power looked like. My first order of business was a complete audit of company finances. What I found was worse than I'd suspected. Years of nepotism, inflated salaries for no-show jobs, and a shocking lack of professional oversight. My ex-fiancé was officially listed as Regional Development Manager, with a salary of $95,000 per year. His job description was vague, his responsibilities unclear, and according to the time logs, he rarely worked more than 20 hours a week. His mother was on the payroll as a consultant making $60,000 annually, for what appeared to be nothing more than occasionally attending family dinners where business was discussed. Various cousins, in-laws, and family friends had carved out their own little fiefdoms within the company structure, drawing generous salaries while contributing minimal value. "This has to stop," I told my husband as we reviewed the books in our home office. "We're running a business, not a charity." "I know," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've known for years, but it was easier to just let it slide than deal with the family drama." "Well, the drama is coming anyway," I replied, pulling up the organizational chart I'd been working on. "We might as well earn it." The staff meeting I called for the following Monday was legendary in company history. Every employee, real and fictitious, was required to attend. The conference room was packed with people who'd grown comfortable treating the company as their personal ATM. I stood at the head of the table in my best suit, looking every inch the businesswoman I'd become. Next to me, my husband provided silent support, making it clear we were presenting a united front. "Effective immediately, this company will operate as a professional business rather than a family welfare system," I announced. "Distributing packets of new job descriptions and performance expectations." The explosion of outrage was immediate and predictable. How dare I waltz in and destroy what they'd built? Who did I think I was anyway? I'm the majority owner, I replied calmly to my ex-fiancé's red-faced shouting, and these changes aren't suggestions. The new policies were simple but revolutionary for this family business. Employees would work full-time hours for full-time salaries, performance would be measured and reviewed quarterly, and positions would be justified by actual business needs. Anyone unable or unwilling to meet professional standards was welcome to seek employment elsewhere. My ex-fiancé lasted exactly 2 weeks under the new regime. Faced with actual work expectations and performance metrics, he submitted his resignation with a scathing letter about how I'd corrupted his uncle and destroyed the family business. His mother's consulting contract was terminated immediately. There was no legitimate business justification for her position, and her primary qualifications seemed to be having opinions about things that weren't her concern. Over the following months, we trimmed the workforce by 30%, eliminating redundancies and phantom positions. The remaining employees, those who actually contributed value, received significant raises and better benefits. Company profits increased by 40% in the first quarter after restructuring. "You've transformed this place," my husband told me as we reviewed the quarterly reports. "I should have done this years ago." "You weren't ready years ago," I replied, "and you didn't have a partner who understood business operations." The family's response to their new financial reality was swift and vicious. We received angry phone calls, threatening letters, and social media posts calling me every name in the book. My ex-fiancé started a whisper campaign claiming I'd stolen his inheritance and manipulated his uncle into abandoning his family responsibilities. But the numbers didn't lie. The company was more profitable, more efficient, and more professionally managed than it had ever been. Our remaining employees were happier and more productive. Our clients were receiving better service. "No regrets?" my husband asked one evening as we celebrated landing a major new contract. I looked around our beautiful home, thought about the thriving business we were building together, considered the life of purpose and partnership we'd created. "Not a single one," I replied, raising my wine glass in a toast. "To cutting dead weight. To new beginnings," he countered, and we drank to the future we were building, free from the family that had never deserved his generosity anyway. 4 years after the wedding that changed everything, mine that never happened and the one that actually mattered, the consequences of my business decisions were rippling through his family like a tsunami. My ex-fiancé, now 36, was working his first real job in over a decade. The software company that hired him as a junior marketing associate was probably unaware they'd employed a man who'd never actually had to show up consistently anywhere in his adult life. According to mutual acquaintances, he was struggling with the concept of a 40-hour workweek, having to ask permission for vacation days, being held accountable for deliverables and deadlines. The basic realities of employment that most people learn in their 20s were foreign concepts to someone who'd coasted on family money his entire career. His mother's situation was even more dramatic. Without her consulting income and the various financial supports my husband had provided over the years, she'd been forced to sell her expensive townhouse and move into a modest apartment across town. "She's working at a department store," my husband reported after running into a family friend at the grocery store. "Part-time, in the cosmetics section." At 62, she was learning what millions of Americans had always known, that surviving requires actual work, not just manipulating the people around you to subsidize your lifestyle. The credit cards that my husband had been quietly paying off for years were now her responsibility. The luxury car lease he'd covered was replaced by a 7-year-old sedan. The weekly mani-pedis and expensive salon visits were luxuries of the past. But perhaps the most satisfying change was watching my ex-fiancé navigate the world without his mother's constant interference, mainly because she was too busy working to micromanage his life. He'd attempted dating a few times, according to the family gossip network. But apparently, potential partners were less charmed by a 36-year-old man who still needed his mother's approval for major decisions and had never learned basic adulting skills. He asked his mother's permission before ordering dinner on a first date, one of my former bridesmaids told me during a chance encounter at the farmer's market. The woman left before dessert. Meanwhile, my husband and I were thriving in ways that would have been impossible under the old family dynamic. Without the constant drain of supporting ungrateful relatives, we'd been able to expand the business significantly. We'd acquired 2 smaller construction companies, opened a branch office in the next state, and diversified into commercial real estate development. I'd proven to have excellent instincts for investment opportunities and business strategy. "You should consider an MBA," my husband suggested one evening as we reviewed proposals for a major downtown development project. "You have natural talent, but formal training would take you to the next level." I was already enrolled in evening classes at the local university's executive program. At 31, I was finally pursuing the advanced education I'd put on hold for a relationship that had never valued my ambitions anyway. The contrast with my old life was stark and sometimes surreal. 4 years ago, I'd been a woman whose opinions were dismissed, whose dreams were considered impractical, whose worth was measured primarily by how well I accommodated other people's needs. Now I was co-running a multi-million-dollar company, pursuing an advanced degree, and married to a man who actively encouraged my ambitions rather than merely tolerating them. "I got a Christmas card from your nephew," I mentioned to my husband one December evening, showing him the generic holiday greeting that had arrived in our mail. Inside, my ex-fiancé had written a brief note. "Hope you're both well. Things are good here. Working hard and learning a lot." There was no anger in the message, no bitterness or blame, just the simple acknowledgement of someone who'd finally been forced to grow up and was perhaps discovering that independence, while challenging, had its own rewards. "Think he's learned anything?" my husband asked, reading the note. "I think he's learned that his mother can't solve all his problems," I replied. Whether he's learned to solve them himself remains to be seen. We never responded to the card, but I kept it tucked in my desk drawer as a reminder of how far we'd all come from that dramatic scene at the altar 4 years earlier. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Some people only grow when they have no other choice. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling them to remain weak. 5 years after my altar abandonment, I was standing in my corner office overlooking the city, one hand on my growing belly, the other holding a business magazine featuring our company on the cover. "Regional construction firm becomes state powerhouse," read the headline above a photo of my husband and me at a recent groundbreaking ceremony. At 32, pregnant with our first child, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined during those dark days after my wedding disaster. The scared, people-pleasing woman who'd been willing to share her husband with his manipulative mother felt like someone I'd known in another lifetime. The phone on my desk buzzed with yet another interview request. Ever since the magazine article, journalists had been fascinated by our story, particularly the angle of how dramatically the company had transformed under new management. Of course, they had no idea about the personal drama behind the business success. To them, I was simply the young wife who'd helped modernize her husband's traditional family business. They didn't know about the altar, the secret courtship, the family explosion, or the satisfaction of watching entitled relatives learn to support themselves. A knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant poked her head in with a bemused expression. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says she's family. Should I tell her you're busy?" Through the glass partition, I could see her, my former almost mother-in-law, looking older and more worn than I remembered. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by a simple department store ensemble. Her perfectly maintained hair showed gray roots, and her face bore the lines of someone learning to live without financial cushions. "Send her in," I said, curious despite myself. She entered my office with none of her former imperious confidence. The woman who'd once commanded every room she entered now seemed diminished, uncertain. "You've done well for yourself," she said, looking around at the tasteful decorations and city view. "Thank you," I replied neutrally, not offering her a seat. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," she said, the words clearly difficult for her to speak, "for the things I said about you, for the way I treated you." I waited, saying nothing. "I was protecting what I thought was mine," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son, my family, my place in the world. I didn't understand that I was actually hurting everyone, including him. And now you do understand?" I asked. She nodded slowly. He's learning to be independent, finally. It's been hard for both of us, but I think it might be good for him. He seems more confident lately, more like a real man instead of your little boy," I finished. "Yes." She looked directly at me for the first time since entering. "You were right about the wedding day, about making him choose. I did manipulate that situation, and I've regretted it every day since." The apology was unexpected but not entirely surprising. Desperation has a way of clarifying people's perspectives. "How is he?" I found myself asking. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "He got a promotion at work last month. He's dating someone, a nice woman who doesn't take his nonsense. He pays his own bills now, makes his own decisions. He's becoming the man I should have let him be years ago. And you?" "I'm learning too," she said with a rueful smile. "Learning that the world doesn't end when you can't control everything. Learning that working for a living isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person." We stood in silence for a moment, Two women who'd been on opposite sides of a war that neither of us had truly wanted to fight. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said finally. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. And I wanted to tell you that despite everything, I think my brother-in-law is happier than I've ever seen him. You make him happy in a way his first wife never did." After she left, I sat back down and placed both hands on my belly, feeling the baby kick. This child would grow up in a household where love wasn't conditional on control, where parents encouraged independence rather than dependence, where healthy boundaries were maintained with extended family. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband. "How did the appointment go? Everything okay with little one?" "Perfect," I typed back. "Both of us are thriving." And we were. Against all odds, despite the family drama and social scandal, despite being abandoned at an altar and falling in love with a married man, despite all the reasons this shouldn't have worked out, we were thriving. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. 7 years after the wedding that never was, I was hosting a dinner party in our newly renovated home, my 2-year-old daughter playing at my feet while my husband grilled steaks on our terrace. The guests were a mix of business associates, genuine friends, and family members who'd chosen relationship over drama, a carefully curated group of people who genuinely celebrated our success rather than resented it. At 34, I owned controlling interest in a construction empire worth over $50 million. I had completed my MBA with honors while managing both pregnancy and business expansion. Most importantly, I had built a marriage based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the kind of love that makes both people stronger rather than smaller. Our daughter would never know what it felt like to compete for a parent's attention, or wonder if she was valued for herself rather than her compliance. She was already showing signs of the independence and confidence we were deliberately nurturing. "Mama, up!" she demanded, raising her arms with the imperious authority of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. As I lifted her, I caught sight of a familiar figure through the front window. My ex-fiancé walking past with a woman I didn't recognize. They were holding hands, talking animatedly about something that had them both laughing. At 39, he looked healthier than I'd ever seen him. Confident, relaxed, genuinely happy. According to family updates, he'd been promoted to senior manager at his company, bought his own small house, and was engaged to a nurse who apparently had no patience for emotional manipulation or mother-in-law interference. His mother had learned to respect their boundaries, partly because she was too busy with her own life to micromanage his. She had indeed discovered that independence, while initially terrifying, had its rewards. At 66, she was working as a sales associate at an upscale boutique, had made friends with her co-workers, and was dating a widower she'd met at a community center dance class. The woman who'd once needed to control every detail of her son's life had learned to build her own. His ex-wife, my husband's first wife, had also flourished in unexpected ways. Free from a loveless marriage, she'd gone back to school, become a travel photographer, and was living the artistic life she'd abandoned for conventional respectability. We exchanged Christmas cards now. Two women who'd found happiness after escaping situations that had never fit properly. "Any regrets about how everything turned out?" my husband asked that evening as we cleaned up after the party, our daughter finally asleep upstairs. I considered the question seriously, as I always did. 7 years ago, I'd been a different person. Smaller, more frightened, willing to accept scraps of attention rather than demand the love I deserved. The woman I'd been would never have had the courage to build this life, to take control of a major company, to stand up to family pressure, to choose happiness over approval. If someone had told me at 28 that getting abandoned at the altar was the best thing that could happen to me, I'd have thought they were insane, I said, loading wine glasses into the dishwasher. But it forced me to discover who I really was underneath all that people-pleasing. "And who are you?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Someone who knows her worth," I replied without hesitation. "Someone who refuses to settle for anything less than real love. Someone who learned that the right person will choose you every single time, not just when it's convenient." Through our kitchen window, I could see the city lights twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, my ex-fiancé was probably calling his fiancée to tell her about his day, making decisions about their future together, learning what it meant to be half of a partnership rather than someone's managed child. His mother was likely getting ready for bed in her modest apartment, perhaps looking forward to her weekend date or planning her next work schedule, finding satisfaction in a life she'd built through her own efforts rather than manipulation. And his uncle's ex-wife was probably editing photos from her latest assignment, living the creative life she'd always wanted but never had the courage to pursue while trapped in expectations. We'd all been broken free from patterns that had kept us small and scared. Some of us had chosen growth, Others had had growth forced upon them. But we'd all learned that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. "Come on," my husband said, taking my hand. "Let's check on our little CEO before bed." As we climbed the stairs together, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The scared woman who'd been willing to compete with a mother-in-law for scraps of attention had become someone who commanded boardrooms, made million-dollar decisions, and never doubted her right to be heard. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having your old life completely destroyed. It's the only way to discover how strong you really are and how much happiness you deserve. Standing in my daughter's doorway, watching her sleep peacefully in a home filled with unconditional love and genuine respect, I knew I'd finally gotten the fairy tale ending I'd always deserved. Not the one I'd originally planned, but something infinitely better. A life built on truth instead of compromise, on strength instead of submission, on the radical idea that love should make you more yourself, not less. My daughter would grow up knowing that she never had to settle, never had to compete for love, never had to choose between being herself and being accepted. That was the real victory. Not the money or the business success or even the personal satisfaction of watching entitled people learn to work for a living. The real victory was breaking a cycle and ensuring the next generation would never accept less than they deserved. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. But more than that, sometimes it's raising children who will never need revenge because they'll never allow themselves to be diminished in the first place.